Today I would like to invite you to listen to the Dhammapada of the Buddha Shakyamuni. 170 verses from the Buddhist scriptures on the YouTube channel Thien Thai in the USA. Just as one would look upon a bubble, just as one would look upon a mirage, if a person thus looks upon the world, the king of death sees him not. During the lifetime of the Buddha, there was a group of seekers who were deeply troubled by the fear of death and impermanence. They clung strongly to the idea that the world was solid, permanent, and dependable. One merchant lost his wealth suddenly and fell into despair because he believed his possessions defined his existence. Another young man lost a loved one and became overwhelmed by grief, unable to understand why life changes so quickly. When they approached the Buddha, he gently taught them that all conditioned things are like bubbles forming and disappearing, like mirages appearing real but empty when approached. The Buddha explained that suffering arises when people mistake impermanent phenomena for lasting reality. A monk once reflected on this teaching while watching water bubbles rise and burst in a river, and he realized deeply that his own thoughts, feelings, and identity were also constantly arising and passing away without fixed essence. Through this insight, fear of death gradually weakened because he no longer clung to what was never stable to begin with. Dear friends, this teaching of the Buddha is a profound invitation to change the way we perceive reality. The world as we experience it is composed of constantly changing conditions. What we call body, mind, relationships, success, and failure are all in continuous movement like waves in an ocean. When the mind grasps at these waves as solid, suffering arises. When the mind sees their empty and changing nature, freedom arises. The Buddha does not deny the existence of experience, but reveals its true nature as transient and conditioned. To see the world as a bubble or mirage is not to reject life, but to understand it deeply without attachment. This understanding brings great peace because it releases the heavy burden of grasping. Dear friends, there was once an elderly woman who spent her entire life worrying about maintaining stability in her family. She believed that if she could control all conditions, her life would remain safe. However, when changes inevitably came through aging, illness, and loss, she became deeply distressed. One day, she met a disciple of the Buddha who shared the teaching of impermanence and illusion-like nature of phenomena. At first, she resisted because it felt unsettling to question what she believed was stable. But gradually, through reflection, she began to observe how everything around her was constantly changing. Even her own thoughts and emotions were not fixed. Through this understanding, her fear slowly softened, and she discovered a quiet peace that did not depend on external control. Dear friends, the Buddha's teaching here is not pessimistic, but liberating. When we see clearly that all phenomena are like bubbles, we stop building identity and happiness upon unstable foundations. Instead of chasing permanence in a changing world, we learn to rest in awareness itself. Awareness does not arise and disappear like objects of experience. It simply observes. When the mind rests in awareness, the cycle of fear and attachment begins to loosen. This is why the Buddha says that one who sees the world in this way is not seen by the king of death. This means that such a person is no longer bound by fear, clinging, or ignorance that leads to suffering cycles. Dear friends, another story tells of a young monk who practiced meditation in a forest. At first, he struggled because his mind was filled with memories, desires, and fears. He believed these thoughts were real and permanent. One day, while sitting beside a stream, he observed bubbles forming in the water and disappearing instantly. He suddenly realized that his thoughts were exactly the same. They appeared, stayed briefly, and vanished without lasting substance. This insight transformed his meditation. He stopped chasing or resisting thoughts and simply observed their arising and passing. In this direct seeing, his mind became peaceful and free from struggle. Dear friends, the teaching of the bubble and mirage is central to understanding the nature of suffering. A bubble appears beautiful and solid for a moment, but contains only air and water held together temporarily. A mirage appears like water in the desert, but disappears when approached. In the same way, many experiences in life appear to offer permanent satisfaction, but dissolve upon deeper investigation. Wealth, status, relationships, and even identity itself cannot provide lasting security because they are conditioned and impermanent. When this is understood clearly, the mind stops chasing illusions and begins to rest in truth. Dear friends, this realization does not lead to withdrawal from life, but to wise engagement. When one understands that phenomena are empty of fixed self, compassion naturally increases because one sees that all beings are also caught in illusion and suffering through attachment. Instead of judgment, there is understanding. Instead of grasping, there is generosity. Instead of fear, there is clarity. This is the transformation that arises from seeing the world as it truly is. Dear friends, the Buddha encourages us to observe directly rather than accept teachings blindly. When we look carefully at our own experience, we can see that thoughts arise and disappear without control. Emotions shift depending on conditions. Even the sense of self changes depending on situation and perception. This direct observation confirms the teaching of impermanence and emptiness-like nature of phenomena. Through such observation, wisdom naturally develops. Dear friends, let us reflect gently on how often we mistake temporary experiences for permanent reality. How often do we cling to joy expecting it to last forever? How often do we resist sadness as if it should never exist? Yet both arise and pass according to conditions. When we see this clearly, equanimity becomes possible. We no longer demand that life remain fixed. Instead, we learn to flow with changing conditions with awareness and peace. Dear friends, this is only the beginning of the deeper reflection on the 70th verse teaching. Further contemplation will explore more deeply the nature of perception, consciousness, and liberation through direct insight into impermanence and non-attachment. Dear friends, as we continue deeper into this contemplation of the Buddha's teaching on the bubble and the mirage, we are invited to go beyond intellectual understanding and interdirect seeing. The Buddha does not ask us to merely accept the idea that the world is impermanent and insubstantial. He invites us to observe it directly within our own experience. When we sit quietly and watch the mind, we begin to notice that thoughts arise like bubbles in water. They appear without invitation, remain briefly, and disappear without trace. Emotions follow the same pattern. Joy arises, sadness arises, anger arises, fear arises, and each passes away when conditions change. Nothing remains fixed or solid in the way we usually assume. Dear friends, there was once a meditator who feared death deeply. This fear followed him even into silent retreat. No matter how much he tried to suppress it, the fear returned again and again. One day, while observing his breath, he suddenly noticed that each breath arose and passed away without continuity. There was no single breath that remained, only a flow of arising and passing. In that moment, he realized that what he called life was also a continuous flow without fixed substance. The fear of death began to lose its foundation because there was nothing solid to lose in the first place. What he called self was only a collection of changing processes. With this insight, a deep calm arose that was free from fear. Dear friends, the Buddha's teaching on the mirage also points to the deceptive nature of perception. A mirage appears in the desert as water, yet when approached it cannot be grasped. In the same way, many of our desires appear to promise fulfillment, but dissolve when pursued without understanding. We chase stability in relationships, security in wealth, identity in reputation, yet all of these shift according to conditions. When this is not seen clearly, suffering arises. When this is seen clearly, freedom arises. The world does not need to be rejected. It needs to be understood as it is. Dear friends, there was a young woman who devoted much of her life to achieving recognition and success. She believed that once she reached a certain level of achievement, she would finally feel complete. However, each time she reached a goal, the satisfaction quickly faded and new desires appeared. One day she encountered a teaching on the mirage-like nature of worldly attainment. Reflecting deeply, she realized that she had been chasing appearances that could not provide lasting fulfillment. Gradually, she began to shift her attention from external achievement to inner awareness. In this shift, she discovered a peace that did not depend on success or failure. Dear friends, when the Buddha says that one who sees the world in this way is not seen by the king of death, he is pointing to a mind that is no longer bound by identification and grasping. Death implies loss of something considered permanent. But when one sees that nothing is permanent in the first place, fear of loss dissolves. The king of death represents ignorance that believes in solid existence. When ignorance is removed through wisdom, the foundation of fear disappears. What remains is clear awareness that is not born and not destroyed in the usual sense of conditioned phenomena. Dear friends, in daily life, this understanding brings great gentleness. We no longer cling tightly to experiences, nor do we reject them. We allow them to arise and pass naturally. Happiness is enjoyed without attachment. Sadness is observed without resistance. Life becomes more spacious and less burdened. Even challenges become opportunities to deepen understanding rather than sources of despair. Dear friends, another practitioner once described his experience after long contemplation of impermanence. He said that everything began to feel lighter, as if life was no longer a solid structure but a flowing movement. He still lived, worked, and engaged with others, but internally there was less fear and less grasping. This is not detachment from life, but freedom within life. The world remained the same, but the way it was seen had completely changed. Dear friends, the teaching of the bubble and mirage ultimately leads us to the cultivation of wisdom and compassion together. Wisdom sees the empty and changing nature of phenomena. Compassion arises because all beings are seen as sharing the same condition of misunderstanding and attachment. Instead of judging others for their suffering, one recognizes the shared nature of confusion and gently supports others toward clarity. Dear friends, as we bring this reflection to completion, let us rest in the simple understanding that nothing in conditioned existence can be held as permanent or separate. Every experience is part of a flowing process that cannot be fixed or owned. When this is seen clearly, the heart becomes free from unnecessary burden. Fear decreases, greed softens, and anger loses its fuel. What remains is a quiet clarity that is not disturbed by changing conditions. Dear friends, may we continue to cultivate this direct seeing in every moment of our lives. May we observe thoughts like bubbles and perceptions like mirages without clinging or rejection. May we gradually free ourselves from the fear that arises from misunderstanding reality. May we walk gently in the world with wisdom and compassion, helping all beings move toward liberation. Dear friends, as a further reflection upon this teaching, we can also understand that the insight into bubbles and mirages is not meant to create detachment in a cold or indifferent sense, but rather to free the heart from unnecessary burden so that compassion may flow more naturally. When the mind is no longer entangled in rigid expectations, it becomes more responsive and more open to the suffering of others. This openness is not weakness but clarity without distortion. It is the heart seeing clearly without the fog of attachment or fear. Dear friends, when awareness deepens in this way, we begin to notice that even our sense of identity is constructed moment by moment. There is no fixed center that remains unchanged. What we call I is a continuous process of perception, memory, reaction, and intention. Each of these arises and passes like waves on the surface of the ocean. When this is seen directly, the pressure of maintaining a rigid self begins to dissolve. In that space of loosening, the mind becomes naturally more peaceful and less defensive. Dear friends, there was once a practitioner who spent many years believing that spiritual progress required great struggle and strict self-control. He often became tense in his practice, trying to force his mind into stillness. One day, he encountered a simple teaching that said even striving itself can become an obstacle when it is driven by grasping. Reflecting on this, he began to soften his approach. Instead of forcing the mind, he learned to observe it gently, like watching clouds pass through the sky. Over time, his meditation became more spacious and natural, and the sense of inner conflict gradually diminished. Dear friends, this teaching reminds us that the path is not about rejecting life, but about seeing life clearly. When we see clearly, we do not need to escape experience, because experience itself becomes transparent. Like a bubble that is seen clearly as empty of substance, there is no longer confusion about what it is. Like a mirage recognized as appearance without essence, there is no longer frustration in chasing it. In the same way, all phenomena can be understood as dependently arisen and therefore free from fixed identity. Dear friends, in this understanding, even ordinary daily tasks become expressions of mindfulness. Walking becomes simply walking. Breathing becomes simply breathing. Speaking becomes simply speaking. There is no need to add layers of conceptual burden onto direct experience. In this simplicity, there is great freedom because the mind is no longer divided by unnecessary interpretation. Dear friends, as we integrate this insight into daily living, we may find that patience naturally increases. When things do not go as expected, there is less agitation because we understand their changing nature. When things go well, there is gratitude without attachment. This balanced awareness allows life to be lived with greater ease and gentleness. Dear friends, may this understanding continue to grow within our hearts, not as abstract philosophy, but as living experience. May we see clearly the bubble-like nature of all conditioned things. May we recognize the mirage-like quality of appearances without being deceived by them. And may this clear seeing support the arising of wisdom, compassion, and inner freedom for the benefit of all beings everywhere. Dear friends, as we come to the final completion of this teaching, let us gently bring all reflections into a single quiet understanding. The Buddha's guidance on seeing the world as a bubble and a mirage leads us not into emptiness of despair, but into clarity free from grasping. When we no longer hold tightly to what is changing, the heart naturally becomes light. When we no longer chase what cannot be grasped, peace begins to arise on its own. In this way, the path is not something far away, but something lived here and now in each breath and each moment of awareness. Dear friends, may we remember that all conditioned things arise and pass away according to causes and conditions. Nothing belongs to us in a fixed way, and nothing can be kept forever as we wish. Seeing this clearly, we learn to live with gratitude while things are present and with acceptance when they change. This is the wisdom that frees the heart from unnecessary suffering and allows compassion to flow without obstruction. Dear friends, may our practice be sincere and continuous, not only in meditation, but in every action of daily life. May we speak with awareness, act with mindfulness, and think with clarity. In doing so, the teaching becomes alive within us and transforms ordinary existence into a path of awakening. May all beings gradually awaken to this understanding and find peace beyond fear and confusion. Thank you for watching my video. Namalamat Ba. I wish to bring this merit towards all disciples and sentient beings, all of whom will attain Buddhahood. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate your time.